Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and welcome to the DGAP morning briefing. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. Today, we want to take a look at the Middle East, more than a year after the Hamas massacre of October the 7th, when Iranian-backed terror organization murdered over 1,200 Israelis, including at a music festival. Israel's counterattack continues against Hamas, but also Hezbollah in Lebanon, against the Houthis in Yemen, other Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq, and indeed against Iran itself. During the past couple of days, the region and the world have been waiting for Israel's response to an air attack by Iran conducted on October the 1st, when the Islamic Republic fired more than 180 rockets on Israel, the second time Iran has done so within a year. It was meant as a retaliation for the killings of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. There has been much speculation as to what Israel's war cabinet is planning vis-à-vis Iran, including an attack on Iran's nuclear or oil facilities. There's also the question which role Washington will play, with the Pentagon recently announcing the deployment of US THAAD missile defense systems to Israel, including US soldiers to man them. In another development, the US carried out strikes against Houthis weapon depots overnight. Meanwhile, civilians in Gaza and Lebanon continue to suffer, and United Nations UNIFIL troops in southern Lebanon have come into Israel's crosshairs. To discuss this very explosive situation, I have the great pleasure of welcoming three experts on the region to shed more light on it. I'm very glad to welcome Rim Momtaz, who very recently took over from Judy Dempsey as Editor-in-Chief of Strategic Europe, published by Carnegie Europe in Brussels. A multiple Emmy Award-winning journalist turned analyst, Rim specializes on Europe and the Middle East and the interplay between those two spaces. She joined Carnegie from the IISS, and before that, she covered France as senior correspondent for Political Europe. After an almost decade-long stint at ABC News in New York and London, where she worked as a producer and investigative journalist. Warm welcome, Rim Momtaz.
Thank you.
Also with us is Dr. Ali Fatollah-Nejad, founder and director of the Center for Middle East and Global Order, and a long-time associate of the German Council on Foreign Relations. He currently teaches Middle East politics and international security at the Hertie School here in Berlin, and is also a fellow with the University of Bonn's Center for Advanced Security, Strategic and Integration Studies, CASSIS. Among his many publications, there is The Islamic Republic in Existential Crisis, which was a Shaliot paper last year, and a much acclaimed book, Iran in an Emerging New World Order. Welcome, Ali. And last but not least, we are joined by, and full disclosure, an old and dear friend of mine, Markus Bickel, who since March 2023 has been security editor of Table Briefings, where he heads the editorial team of Security Table, a newsletter which is published twice weekly. Markus knows the region well, inter alia from two extended stints as a journalist there, reporting first from Beirut during the 2000s, and then from 2012 to 2015 from Cairo as the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung's Middle East correspondent. More recently, he was editor of the Amnesty Journal for 4 years, and then directed the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung's office in Tel Aviv. Warm welcome, Markus.
Thank you, Henning.
Some quick housekeeping remarks to start us off. Our panelists have 5 minutes each to assess the situation. Rim will focus on Israel's war, Ali on Iran's calculations and options, and Markus on the role of Europe and the wider consequences of further escalation, especially on the US election. After some discussion on the panel, we will be opening up for your questions and comments. To join the conversation, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and put your question in person to the panel. This is the preferred option, but you're also welcome to offer your comment and questions via the chat function. Please note that the briefing will be recorded and that we will have to close on time at 9:30 a.m. And with a quick word of thanks to my GFP colleagues, Jan Stöckmann, Milan Nitsch, Julia Loeva, Wiebke Evering, Helga Beck, and many others who keep this series running, as well to my colleagues today on duty in the events and communications teams. Let's start with Rim.
Thank you very much, Henning, and thank you to everyone for joining. This is obviously an ongoing, developing situation with very real ramifications, not just for the region, but also for Europe. So as Henning was saying, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the current situation on the ground, the Israeli operations in Lebanon in particular, what the stated goals are from the perspective of the Israeli government, and then what is the situation on the ground in Lebanon. So as you may have been following over the past few weeks, it's been now 3 weeks, Israeli operations in Lebanon have yielded some high-level successes for Israel. The Israeli operations were able to take out the top-tier leadership of Hezbollah. That is a turning point. The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, is a very major event, because Hassan Nasrallah was not just the leader of the armed part of Hezbollah. He was the leader of the entire party in all of its emanations, including its socio-cultural and political branches, and he was also a spiritual leader. But beyond that, and more importantly from the Iranian perspective, he had become a central figure in the Iranian conventional deterrence network across the region and around Israel, with operational oversight in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen, obviously, in addition to Lebanon. He was killed in a massive attack on the southern suburb of Beirut, which is the most densely populated part of the Lebanese capital, that is already a very densely populated city. He was killed using multiple bunker-busting bombs that are especially made in the United States, and that flattened at least 3 very big buildings, residential buildings full of civilians, because you have to keep in mind that a lot of civilians had already started fleeing southern Lebanon and had sought refuge in the southern suburb, and so that already densely populated part was even more densely populated. We don't know, we don't have exact figures for how many civilians were killed in that attack. Israeli reporting said it was probably around 300 people. Hezbollah has not allowed the publishing of these numbers, because obviously for their own political considerations. But what we have seen is 2 things. One, obviously, a lot of terror among the Lebanese population about the expansion of the Israeli operations deeper into Lebanon, causing massive humanitarian problems, and also more and more people who used to live in the southern suburb criticizing publicly Hezbollah for example, building their bunker where clearly their leadership used to meet under these residential buildings, though that does not make it, per international law, a legitimate target, of course, especially with such a high level of civilians killed. Beyond that, so what we see is an Israeli 2-pronged approach, one that is targeting more of the leadership, more of the weapons depots, more of the missile launchers in the southern suburb of Beirut, but also across Lebanon, not just southern Lebanon, but also the Bekaa Valley, and sometimes some locations in the mountains. That has caused massive internal displacement, coupled with the other part of the Israeli approach, which is a much less targeted approach and attack on southern Lebanon. For the time being, they are incursions. They have not remained inside the Lebanese territory for weeks. They have remained a few days and then gone back to the other side. But what we see is basically the preparation of shaping the coming operations, which will probably develop into, and that will be the last part of my opening remarks, developing into probably an occupation of at least a 5 kilometer strip inside the Lebanese territory. The Israeli leadership says that they need to do that. They call it a buffer zone, even though it would be an occupation per international law, in order to increase and bring more security for their north and allow the return of their 60 to 80,000 forcibly displaced Israelis, which have been since Hezbollah opened the front on October 8th in support, as they say it, for the Hamas front in Gaza after the terror attack on Israel on October 7th. On the Lebanese side, the Lebanese authorities are dealing right now with 1.3 million internally displaced in the course of only 2 weeks. That is 1 in 5 people in Lebanon are internally displaced against the backdrop of a state that is quasi bankrupt. As you know, Lebanon has been in the throes of a very deep and terrible economic and financial crisis since 2019, and that is exercising a lot of pressure on the state infrastructure, but also, by the way, on internal intra-Lebanese tensions, which we will get back to. That is one of the big possible ramifications and risks tied to the continued Israeli operations, which is maybe turning Lebanon into a real failed state. And I will leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, Rim. Maybe one quick point, because you mentioned the southern zone which Israel might be creating. Is there any chance of the Lebanese army taking positions there? Because I think that's also sort of a contentious issue, which according to UN resolutions that should be the case. But in fact, Hezbollah has been occupying southern Lebanon.
Yes, so I think that's a central question. The Lebanese armed forces have deployed and have been present in parts of South Lebanon for a while. Actually, since UN Security Council Resolution 1701 that ended the 2006 war between Hezbollah and Israel. But of course, given that Hezbollah is stronger in many ways in the south of Lebanon than the Lebanese armed forces, there is a domination of Hezbollah up until now of where the Lebanese armed forces can operate in South Lebanon. That does not apply to all of the country, of course. And as you know, the Lebanese armed forces have been weakened by that financial crisis that I had just mentioned. Countries like the US, France, but also Germany and Saudi Arabia and Qatar have had to provide financial support to even just get food and fuel for the Lebanese armed forces. But the interesting thing today is that there is a political desire and will among the leadership of the Lebanese armed forces to take a stronger position in South Lebanon and do their duty. But of course, they need the support of the international community in terms of weapons and in terms of financing. And I'm sure we'll get back to that at a later point in our briefing this morning.
We definitely will. Thank you very much, Rim. And then let's now move on to Ali with a quick assessment of where we stand in Iran. I mean, they have been waiting for this counterattack by Israel for a couple of days now. What's your sense, sort of? But this will be coming, or will Israel sort of skip it?
First of all, good morning. Happy to be able to join you at this important juncture. I mean, first of all, and also following what Reem has excellently sketched out, we're probably witnessing the apex of the war in the Middle East since October 7th last year. For the Islamic Republic of Iran, despite initial celebration of the October 7th massacre, the entire war became a double-edged sword. because on one hand, one could claim a propagandistic victory of the so-called axis of resistance, including Hamas against Israel, and portray Israel not as a military superpower, but to see it as quite vulnerable. So all of that is, from the Iranian viewpoint, something, positive. But on the other hand, and we've seen an increasing dilemma from the Iranian side because of the reluctance of Tehran to directly engage Israel militarily. And instead, they've opted to, basically activate or encourage different components of their so-called axis of resistance in the region to take on Israel. But in the wake of numerous so-called targeted killings by Israel, starting early this year with Hamas leader Aruri in Beirut, and going on to different. I mean, I don't want to enumerate all those killings of top commanders of both the Axis of Resistance, but also of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The dilemma became very strong because what the Iranian regime then feared, actually starting quite early on in the war, is the collapse of its legitimacy among its domestic but also regional supporters, given the reluctance of directly engaging Israel. And this kind of legitimacy problem and crisis has pushed Iran to launch two unprecedented historical strikes on Israel on October in April, on April 13th and October 1st. So the driving force behind those attacks was quite similar. I mean, in the latter case, it was obviously the decapitation of Hezbollah, but also Haniyeh's targeted killing in Tehran on July 31st, where Iran pledged harsh revenge, but nothing had happened. So pressure was mounting. Whereas the second attack that we've witnessed was different in quality because the projectiles and missiles that were used were much more forceful. Of course, the Iranians had warned the other side, notably the US, but also Russia, about their impending attack. But nevertheless, this was seen in Israel as something different than in October. Hence, Israel's pledge to give a severe response to that, and we're still waiting for that. So I have been suggesting that the Islamic Republic of Iran is finding itself in a grand strategic dilemma. One, pertaining to its regional standing and policies, predicated upon the axis of resistance, with the legitimacy crisis that has evolved there. So there is some pressure, there's a lot of pressure not to stay muted against those kinds of what is seen as Israeli aggression. On the other side, there is a grand strategic preference that is associated with the current Iranian presidency under Masoud Pezeshkian, a mission that, by the way, is supported by Iran's power center that consists of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, his quasi-parallel government, plus the IRGC. So this mission is to seek some kind of accommodation and understanding with the United States in order to get sanctions relief, something that is seen vital for regime stability interests at this point of time, because the new administration has realized that the state coffers are emptier than they believed. And of course, any direct military confrontation with Israel would be counterproductive to this grand strategic preference. So there's a large dilemma in Tehran, which has led after July 31st, the targeted killing of Haniyeh, to the dominant regime narrative, then what one should not directly engage Israel, because this is a trap that is, this is Netanyahu's trap to lure in also the United States in a large war against Iran. So this has been the main the main narrative that was dominating the Iranian discourse is still being felt today. We've seen similar arguments in major papers, also close to Khamenei over the last days. So this kind of reluctance still exists, but there's a lot of pressure on the other side. Now they're waiting to see what will happen in terms of the Israeli counterstrike. From what we can say in terms of the expected Iranian retaliation afterwards, on the night of the October 1st attack, there was two statements by the RGC. One statement said, after saying that for the Iranians the operation has ended, like they did back in April, that Iran will respond if Israel's retaliation will be proportional. So suggesting that it's not proportional, they're not going to, maybe they're going to swallow it. The same suggestion was made by Iran's foreign minister quite recently. So we'll have to see what will happen. Also, what will happen in the open, because there's also a tendency for the Iranian side not to publicize everything that Israel is doing in the country in order to preserve this kind of image of strength. So it's at this point of time, it's very difficult to predict what kind of escalation cycle we're going to see. And some kind of escalation may be to the benefit to the Islamic Republic of Iran, but then again, a great war that is a sustained direct military confrontation with Israel and, let alone the United States, would be hugely costly for Iran because of various dimensions that I can explain later on. So there's still this reluctance from the Iranian side not to risk a large war because they fear that it could destabilize the regime.
Thank you very much, Ali. And with also an eye on the clock, let's move quickly on to Markus now, Markus Bickel, and please have your input now. Thanks.
Thank you. Continuing with what Ali and Dream said, I'll have a short focus on the role of the European Union, but maybe would like to state one thing first. If we talk about escalation and the danger of a great war, what we see since October 7th and October 8th of 2023, when Hezbollah engaged in the fighting as well, is basically, in terms of victims, the largest regional escalation we've seen since 2003, when the US and its allies invaded Iraq, and since 2011, 2012, when the revolution and later on the war in Syria started. For more than 40,000 people in Gaza and more than 2,000 people in Lebanon and in Israel, if you count in the terror attack victims of October 7th, 2023 have died. So we are already talking about maybe the largest crisis and one of the largest crises in the Middle East since the founding of Israel in 1948. And we've seen on the other side an almost complete failure of multilateral diplomacy. That's where the EU comes in. But if we take the EU's position and strength as an actor, as a diplomatic actor, a financial actor in the Middle East, it's a weak actor. So they are coming together in Brussels today. Once again, the heads of state and government of the European Union, the Middle East is on the agenda. I remind you that yesterday the heads of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, were in Brussels too. So yes, Europe has this conflict on a high agenda, but it didn't fulfill its diplomatic goals to influence this conflict. So breaking it down, I would say that the European Union's main goal right now is to strengthen the other multilateral actor, the United Nations. Also, there are just a few facts which are surely known to you, but which reminds us of the failure and of the weakness of this international actor, United Nations. UNIFIL in southern Lebanon, where the United Nations is present since 1978 already, and in even more strength since the war in 2006. UNIFIL soldiers have been attacked by Israel, and the maybe even bigger actor, though not a military one, UNRWA, has lost more than 220 of its employees in the course of the last year, mainly in Gaza. And there again, the European Union is behind in strengthening the UN in its mandate after Germany and other countries stopped their financing of UNRWA in the beginning of the year after the allegations that Hamas members are part of their employees and that some of these Hamas members have been involved in the planning and operating of the October 7th attacks. Germany and others saw it as sufficient how UNRWA dealt with the allegations and is paying again money for UNRWA. So I think this is an important part of what EU is striving to reach in Palestine, Israel, but in the wider region, to make sure that civilian life is possible. And what UNRWA is doing with its offices and its schools and in hospitals, not only in Gaza and the West Bank, but also in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, is vital for a longer diplomatic and political perspective for the Middle East. So excuse me if I don't highlight the main achievements EU has reached over the last year, but I think they see themselves as the last standing backer of the United Nations with its agencies and organizations in the region, and also because the United States diminished its payments for UNRWA. So maybe to leave us for a discussion and for the questions from our participants, this already leads to the November elections in the United States, where I think many road junction, it's a big road junction in terms of what the EU can do, of course, of what the US can do, and what in the end multilateral diplomacy can do, because besides of the more or less bilateral negotiations over the freeing of hostages and ceasefire in Gaza, and now we need one in Lebanon as well, there has been a failure on that part, on side of the EU and on side of the UN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Markus. I think we will come to a few points very soon. But maybe first go back to Rim for a moment. You wrote an article about the role of Europe, especially now that the war has been sort of extended to include Lebanon. What's your take? Are you as pessimistic as Markus is that there's a very limited role for the Europeans?
I mean, there's a limited role in the sense that if we put the bar at do we expect the Europeans and the EU to be game changers in their interventions and end the war, then yes, I'm pessimistic. The Europeans and the EU do not have enough leverage on their own to be able to end this war, whether it's in Gaza or in Lebanon. Obviously, unfortunately, the United States is the only actor who can really be sort of a game-changing actor on its own. And as we have seen over the past year, the US administration, I'm talking about the White House, not necessarily the State Department or the Pentagon, but the White House, has not really shown any real will to use the vast leverage the US has in order to shape the conduct of this war by Israel without denying Israel's right to defend itself. There are rules established by international law for a reason, and that has not been applied, unfortunately, over the past year. And I say this because we saw in the 1980s and the early 90s, presidents like Ronald Reagan, like George H.W. Bush, use leverage that the United States has quite effectively in order to shape the behavior of Israel during previous conflicts, including, for example, the siege of West Beirut in 1982. But below that threshold, actually, especially in Lebanon, European countries and the EU do have leverage and can do things without needing the US to cooperate, because to be clear, and I think Marcus touched upon that a bit, right now what we are hearing from US officials is that they do not support a ceasefire in Lebanon. They have said that quite clearly. So that's a new position. But setting that aside, for example, the Europeans provide 1/3 of the troops to UNIFIL, which are the United Nations peacekeeping operation in southern Lebanon at the border between Lebanon and Israel. That is more than 3,000 troops, including 1,000 troops from Italy. And it's interesting because it's 13 different European countries that are troop contributing. Of course, the biggest contingents are contributed by Italy, France, Spain, Poland, and Ireland. That is now under attack. What we are seeing is Israeli operations targeting at least twice or three times over the past week or two, deliberately targeting the UNIFIL bases and peacekeepers. That is based on conversations with UNIFIL commanders. And that is obviously against international law. And there are accusations by the Israeli leadership that UNIFIL has not done its responsibilities, has not stopped or destroyed Hezbollah tunnels or Hezbollah presence. That is misunderstanding what the mandate of a peacekeeping operation is. I don't want to take up too much time, but I can come back to that if there is a need for that. So what the Europeans can do is, for example, send more troops to UNIFIL to strengthen it in order to make sure that this peacekeeping operation continues to exist. The importance of maintaining UNIFIL is first and foremost to have eyes and ears on the ground that are not dependent on either Israel or the Lebanese forces or Hezbollah, obviously. That is important. And also beyond, to have a presence and leverage. Second of all, European countries, whether it's France or Germany or beyond the EU, the UK, but also Poland, have connections and ties with the Lebanese armed forces. Henning, you had asked me about their presence in the south. The only way forward, the only constructive way forward will be at one point for the Lebanese state to be able to take proper control of the south, push Hezbollah off of the border, but also make sure that Israeli forces do not occupy the south, which would be a violation of the territorial integrity of Lebanon and the UN Charter, of course. And so strengthening and supporting the Lebanese armed forces, including, by the way, through the provision of weapons such as anti-tank defenses, anti-air defenses, because unfortunately, over the past 2 weeks, for example, Israel has shelled at least 2 positions of the Lebanese armed forces and killed Lebanese soldiers. So that will be important to enable them to carry out that double-pronged mission. And finally, obviously, there is a huge humanitarian need now created by the Israeli occupation or possible potential occupation, 1.3 million people, and there's no need to come up with new money, by the way, from the EU, for example, because I don't know if you followed, but in May, the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, along with the Cypriot President, went to Lebanon and announced a €1 billion package for the Lebanese government in order to enable the Lebanese government to prevent migrants and refugees from coming to the EU. There is a lot to say about that approach, but perhaps a better use of that €1 billion that already is earmarked would be to provide immediate humanitarian aid and also support, maybe even through the European Peace Facility, for the Lebanese armed forces, so that we can, sort of build up the state institutions and provide security, or at least the beginning of some sort of security, both for the Lebanese people, but also obviously stop the attacks on Israel and allow the Israeli displaced to come back home.
Thank you very much. First questions are coming in, which is great. But before we open up, one quick question to Markus, because you alluded to it, the role also of the United States. It seems, and you've been watching the Israeli government for a long time. Why do you think is it or it seems very difficult to influence the Israeli government in any way? Sort of there are various occasions where Netanyahu simply ignored what Biden told him, and that is sort of is that a new development, would you say, or has it always been that Israel is at the end? While they're saying, I heard a sort of a former high-ranking security person from the Israel government saying we only listen to the Americans and Germans anyway. All the others sort of don't count, but those two. But not in this situation apparently. So do you have an explanation why that is?
Well, as is well known, I think it has a lot to do with the personal relationship between Netanyahu and Biden. And Netanyahu was just able for more than 12 months now, yes, to ignore the advices, the directives, the wishes of the US government. I'm not a psychologist to explain how this is possible, but maybe it's Trump in the background who could come back, who might come back. And let's say in January of this year, nobody really imagined that Netanyahu would be able or willing to prolong this war, which was then the Gaza war, until the US elections. Now it is clear that he can and that he did. And in case that Trump wins, Netanyahu has his president in the White House. And until then, he was able to keep Biden in check and have the war that he was striving for.
Thank you very much. And very quickly to Ali, Biden, or so Trump or Harris, what is the better option from a Tehran point of view? If you say the overarching aim really of the new president is to somehow find an accommodation with the United States.
Well, obviously, from an Iranian perspective, Harris would be a much better choice. It would probably also be, and the Harris administration would probably based upon also a Biden or Obama school of thought in terms of foreign policy, which has over the past few years, I mean, when it comes to Biden, have been quite reluctant vis-a-vis Iran. They have not directly, responded to Iranian proxy military actions in a proportionate manner. From the Iranian perspective, Harris administration would be very favorable. There's a lot of nervousness when it comes to a potential return of Trump to the White House. The Iranians know that Trump's maximum pressure sanctions has created a lot of challenges for them. It has cost Iran $200 to $300 billion. So they fear the repetition of such strong economic sanctions. But then again, there is also a transactional dimension when it comes to Trump. There was something that was also laid down in the memoirs of the former CENTCOM commander when he was writing about Trump's decision to drone kill Soleimani in early 2020 near Baghdad. And Trump's calculation was that in the wake of this killing, he may be able to strike a deal with Tehran. So you don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainties about Trump's tendency to engage with dictators. But as a bottom line, yes, a Harris administration would be much better. A Trump administration would be very difficult to calculate. So it would also put some limits to Iran's expansive policies.
Thank you very much. Let's now go to the first question. Thomas Nehls, wouldn't you want to put your question in person to the panel? It's so much better if you could. I don't know whether you are able to open your mic and put the question yourself. Thomas Nehls?
Ja, hallo, ist das jetzt?
Ja, wir hören, ja, we can hear you.
Ja, guten Morgen. Hochinteressant. Ich habe zwei Anmerkungen, nicht zuletzt in Erinnerung.
Okay, can we switch to English?
Der Bundeskanzler ja noch versprochen hat, weiterhin Waffen an Israel zu liefern. Aber ich habe aufmerksam zugehört, den beiden Schwenkern in Richtung Europa. Warum tut sich da nichts? Das hat ja Frau Montas und Herr Wickel dezidiert angesprochen. Ist da, klar gefragt, journalistisch zugespitzt ein bisschen Deutschland der Hauptbremser aus natürlich
Sir, can you please
geschichtlichen Gründen und zweitens auch der Staatsräson?
hello? Can you
Okay,
please
thank
talk
you.
in English,
Das alles quasi ad acta gelegt wird.
Thomas Niels, thank you very much. I have to translate your question now because not everyone speaks German on this call.
Yeah.
Never mind. I paraphrase. The question really is sort of: is Germany sorry, now my mic was closed. Is Germany the who's putting the country is putting brakes on a more concerted European effort? And is this sort of linked back to the conception of Israel's security being a raison d'être or sort of a reason of state for Germany? I don't know who wants to tackle that. Maybe Markus?
Reem, you go first. You raised your hand.
I mean, I'll be happy to answer that quite quickly.
Good.
Listen, I don't think it's controversial to say that the European member states have been divided since the beginning of the Israeli response to the terror attack on October 7th. To me, you know, there are basically three camps among the EU. You have the very pro-Palestinian position from Ireland and Spain, for example, and then you have the position led by Germany, which has been quite unconditionally in support of Israel, and then you have sort of a middle ground position embodied by France that recognizes Israel's imperative to defend itself and make sure that its citizens are secure, but also recognizes the equally important rights of Palestinians and now Lebanese to live in security as well, and for their rights to be recognized. And so, yes, in current, for example, diplomatic efforts, even on Lebanon, there is an issue related to the position of Germany. That is something that, you know, diplomats are trying to work through. Obviously, also Germany provides about maybe 25-30% of the weapons that Israel gets from overseas, abroad. And so that is a real point of leverage, by the way. I have seen that, you know, German officials have said that they have conditioned the supply of these weapons on an Israeli commitment not to use them against civilians and children. The problem with that position, of course, is that many Israeli responses, when they are accused of killing too many civilians, and in terms of collateral damage, as the word is, their response is basically that any civilians that remain in the areas where they have given evacuation orders are no longer civilians. That, of course, is not proper and is in violation of international law. And unfortunately, when Israel says that, there is no accountability. There's been quite a lot of impunity, whether it's from the US government or from other governments, including the German government. So that is a real problem. And by the way, beyond just the immediate aftermath of this and consequence of this war and the current conduct of this war, the two consequences is, one, there's bound to be a massive migration flow that is going to emanate from this war, and that the European Union is going to have to deal with. And we see how that is affecting domestic politics in all of the countries in Europe. And second of all, there is unfortunately today an assault by Israel on its government against, for example, the UN, but also the international legal system when it comes to the ICC or the ICJ, that is, I'm sorry, going to have consequences for countries like Iran or Russia or China when they will want to defy the international system. How will the Europeans and the Americans be able to try to impose rules and order on them when they covered what Israel is doing right now?
Thank you very much. Markus, you also want to come in? I mean, this debate about sending weapons to Israel has sort of occupied the German government for the past couple of days. The British government has imposed a limited ban, but that hasn't sort of really made Israel change its ways. if I may say so, France has imposed an arms embargo. How do you see the German role in this?
Yes, the debate about the arms deliveries to Israel is the main debate Germany is into in the last 2 weeks, I'd say. There was the claim that Germany stopped sending weapons or giving the green light for demands to send them, but the new numbers coming out from the Ministry of Economy yesterday show that even in the last few months there were weapons worth 40 million euros to Israel. So yes, Germany, unlike the UK and France, has continued to deliver these weapons, and Germany is standing for historical reasons in this political point right now on the side of Israel. But Israel, not to forget, also criticizes Annalena Baerbock again and again for not being strong enough on the side of Israel. But I wouldn't, I think the US is more important for Israel's warfare. And the German debate is always very unique and very Germany-centered rather than centered on the ongoings in the Middle East. Maybe this is just what I would say at this point, because it's a very long and complicated debate.
Yes, thank you very much. There's one hand up, which I welcome very much. Simon Roller, you can put your question next, and then I would like to pick up two things from the chat. One is on the role of Azerbaijan, and another one referring to Russia and China. But first, let's go to Simon Roller, please. Introduce yourself and put your question to the panel.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm a student from Mannheim, Germany, and thank you very much for these interesting talks. And as you've mentioned regularly, that Israel and also Hamas and the other terrorist organizations, of course, they violate international law and also are not in accordance with international legal agreements. And in this context, my general feeling is that the United Nations have an important role, but they appear to be very unconscious or almost helpless in this conflict. So would you say that in this context, the United Nations have any power on this conflict, or would you say they are more a passive observer?
Thank you very much. Who would like to take that question? Markus, maybe again, you spoke about strengthening the United Nations.
Yes, I think that's the only real way to keep up what is the role of a rule-based international order. The United Nations, with its agencies, with its organizations, is the basis of a world where peace can be reached. So I think strengthening that, be it UNIFIL with the suggestion you remade, and UNRWA with its unique role as being able to provide education, to provide health services, to provide housing in times of crisis like this is basically the main way the aftermath of this conflict should be tackled.
Thank you. If no one else wants to come in, we have a kind of special question by Boris Ginsburg, asking Ali in particular about the role of Azerbaijan, who's a country that is partnered with Israel. Maybe you want to talk to that.
Yeah, sure. And very briefly, I mean, I'm not privy of all details, but there is a large fear from the Iranian side that the Israeli intelligence services and are very much influencing Azerbaijan. But it doesn't mean that Iran would like to escalate, any kind of conflicts that it has, because it also fearing Azerbaijan playing a different role in terms of the ethnicities, because there are two provinces, as you may know, in the northwest of Iran that are also called Azerbaijan, where I was born, by the way. So there's some reluctance there. But if I may, I want to add some points and observations on European policy. I agree with my colleagues saying that what is needed is more European and also German pressure upon Israel to stop the kinds of indiscriminate attacks that it has been doing, and it is increasingly seems to be doing also in the case of Lebanon, let alone Gaza. On the other hand, we've seen also a lot of reluctance from the European side vis-à-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran. We've had this European obsession with the nuclear deal, and we've seen that the economic dividends from the nuclear deal has been used by Tehran to feed its repressive apparatus at home, but also feed its expansionist policies and projects, including the drones and missile programs and including financing the proxies. So what we have been seeing accumulating over the last few years is also a result of this, a European policy that is in ruins. But what the Europeans have, they have some leverage, and the most important leverage that they have vis-à-vis Iran is the so-called snapback mechanism that is enshrined in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, that allows the E3 to reactivate comprehensive UN sanctions based upon Iranian violation of nuclear commitments, and without the possibility of veto by Russia and China. So this would automatically kick in a process at the end of which comprehensive UN sanctions are going to be reimposed, something that the Iranian leadership is very much fearing, and something that the Europeans have not really talked about. There is increasing talk and contemplation whether to use this mechanism or not quite recently. But it would require much more political will to go down that route. But in my view, and of course, this mechanism gonna expire in January 2026, so 10 years after the implementation of the JCPOA. So there is some window of opportunity here left for the Europeans to use their most important leverage that they have. The problem with the whole European, in my view, the whole European security and policy debate, and that we often claim that we don't have leverage. Whereas if you, if you try to identify points of leverage, you can do that. Of course, European power is not at all comparable to US military power, and US military containment is absolutely important as a kind of accompanying force to whatever maybe Europe would do. But also the Europeans can do things. But the problem is that we have European, failings in terms of dealing not only with Israel, but also with the Islamic Republic.
Thank you very much. I wanted to move on to the question posed by Lutz Uphoff about the role of China and also Russia. Does the panel see any role? I understand that Russia has sort of restarted air attacks in Syria over the last couple of days, but otherwise has sort of not played a very significant role, and neither has done China. But maybe the panel has some insights on that. Rim, maybe?
What we are seeing, obviously, is actors like Russia and China sitting on the sidelines and seeing how they can benefit from this situation, and watching the US get dragged into an unwinnable situation that always benefits them. Russia is obviously increasingly connected to Iran in terms of the missile and drone programs that they need for their war of aggression in Ukraine. That relationship has gotten deeper and deeper. There are open questions about whether Russia, in exchange, is helping Iran, for example, develop its delivery vectors on their missiles in case they want to cross the nuclear threshold. That is obviously a very big concern for the Europeans and the Americans. We don't have any kind of indication that that is the case, but that is what is on people's minds. At some point, people thought that maybe China was going to become a mediator in the Middle East. That is, I think, quite a ridiculous idea, but they thought it was going to happen because of the Iran-Saudi agreement that was signed under the auspices of China. China's approach to diplomacy is not like the Western approach. They do not want to be mediators or to be micromanaging any of these issues. They see themselves as enablers of things if they see an opportunity, but they want to keep at bay. The only thing that they have really cared about and that they have gotten from, by the way, Iran is that their ships going through the Strait of Hormuz in the Red Sea not be attacked by the Houthi Yemeni militia that is connected to Iran, and that has largely been respected. So that is their play right now. Israel and Russia do a lot of deconfliction in the Syrian theater because, as you know, Russia has control basically over the air of Syria as since it intervened in order to keep and save President Assad in 2015. Russia has allowed Israel to carry out its attacks against the IRGC elements, but also the Hezbollah elements operating out of Syria. It has not prevented them from doing that. So, as you can see, lines can be a little bit more complex than straightforward. And I have to say, I fully agree with Ali about the need to put pressure on Iran just as much as the West has to put pressure on Israel, and that maybe can bring me to responding to another question as we're running out of time in terms of the diplomacy that is happening or not over trying to get to a ceasefire in Lebanon. The US and France separately for a long time tried to push forward a plan that would see Hezbollah withdraw north of the Litani River, which is seen as the natural separation between northern Lebanon and southern Lebanon, and in exchange for which Israel would stop its attacks on Lebanon, and there would be a consensus on the election of a new Lebanese president. As you know, it's been 2 years since Lebanon has been able to elect a new president, in part because of the political bloc that Hezbollah has put, because they want to be able to choose a president that supports them. And in that, obviously, Iran is a player. Iran has a huge amount of leverage on Hezbollah. We have seen a constant stream of Iranian officials come to Lebanon since Nasrallah was assassinated in order to kind of occupy the territory and also send very stern messages to the Lebanese opposition political parties, telling them that, warning them not to think that this is an opportunity that they must seize in order to change the political power dynamics in Lebanon. And the Iranian leadership has continued to impose on Lebanon this open front in solidarity, so-called, with Gaza. So there is definitely a lot of need for more pressure on Iran to allow for a resolution, just as Israel needs to also stop its assault on Lebanon. Iran needs to stop using Lebanon as a field for its own projection of power.
Thank you very much, Wim. That's also a very strong way to conclude. But the 2 minutes we have left, I would like to use to give each of you again just maybe 30 seconds your sense where this is heading. Ali's earlier said that it's maybe the apex now of this crisis, which started with Hamas massacre about a year ago. Also the question about escalation into a big war, likely or not. I would propose we go to the inverse order. So Markus first, then Ali, and then Wim has the last word. But keep it really short if you could.
Okay, I'll try to be as short as I can. The election in the US is going to be giving a hint in which direction the de-escalation hopefully might go. I think in Lebanon it will be easier, would be my guess, to find a ceasefire, even though a lot of the stakes have changed since Nasrallah was killed. Much of the leadership was eliminated, but there was always a clearer diplomatic path also with Amos Hochstein, the US negotiator between the two. And regarding Gaza and West Bank, yes, there's a need for multilateral diplomacy to come out of the humanitarian crisis and to bring a political dialogue, be it the two-state solution or other suggestions, back on the table.
Thank you very much. Ali, 30 seconds.
Yes, on Russia and Iran, very quickly, there is close coordination between the two and consultation. We don't know the details, but we know that Russian Prime Minister was in Tehran the day before October 1st, and there was just a few days ago a meeting between Pezeshkian and Putin. And it's clear that for the Russians, they're the big beneficiaries from this war because of Western attention being redirected to the Middle East instead of Ukraine. And China's, behavior on the Houthis' attack on international shipping when they reached a deal only to protect their own ships also tells you a lot about Chinese calculations in this war. We see a huge discussion going on when it comes to the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran. But we know that there's also discussion going on in Tehran about the very future of the axis of resistance and Hezbollah, and also following the decapitation. But be it as it may, the Islamic Republic of Iran cannot really afford to stop its axis of resistance policies because it's an important leverage vis-a-vis also the West. So this kind of grand strategic dilemma is really very difficult to solve for them.
Thank you very much. Rim.
Very quickly, some thoughts on where we're going. At some point, Israel is going to have to choose between triggering a civil war and the complete collapse of Lebanon at its border, which will make its own citizens less safe. So that's a question they need to ask. So either they continue with what they're doing, and that's where we might end up, or they are willing at some point to give a pause and try to allow the Lebanese state and Lebanese armed forces, with the support of the Europeans, hopefully, to try to take over the south again and rebuild the state, which would be the better option. Because as you know, all of these militias, whether it's Hezbollah or before them the Palestinian militants who came from Palestine in the 60s and Kuwait, were able to set up base in Lebanon because the Lebanese state was weak. And so it might be time to stop that. That's one thing. The second thing is I have big worries about what the big blows to Iran's network of influence, conventional one, is going to do in terms of maybe pushing them further into nuclear proliferation, understanding that their 40-year strategy of building this ring of fire conventionally around Israel with Hezbollah, with Hamas, is not working and has been now weakened. That is my big worry moving forward. And obviously hoping for European consensus to come up with some effective, obviously, policy options as we laid out here. They have leverage in many ways, and so there's a need for that to be used. And I will end there.
Thank you very much. And with that, I bring this meeting to a close. Apologies for overrunning. Apologies also for not addressing every question which came my way. As always, they come quite late, and then we have difficulties to squeeze them in. But please join me in thanking our three excellent panelists. Thank you all for a very lively morning here. Rim Momtaz, Ali Fatollah-Nejad, and Markus Bickel. Join us again next week when we'll be talking about the Indian-German government consultations which take place in Berlin, I believe, and then we take after that we take a quick break. But see you again next week. Have a good rest of the week. Thanks again to our panelists, and a very good morning from the German Council on Foreign Relations. Goodbye.